Hello! It is time for another How To Tuesday. And so, if you're curious about garter stitch, why you would want to use it, what it's for, what it looks like, how to do it, then stay tuned. This is Aradia and Nawari of Aradia's Hand and Danae's Divine, where I create myth, magic, and meaning for your everyday life through art, intuition, and energy work. And here we go with some garter stitch. This is part of my Exploring Stitch Patterns series. I'm actually going to make a new playlist that is just stitch patterns. I have a giant knitting one, and I'll link to that below so you can see all of my knitting videos, but I'll make a special one just for the stitch patterns so you can just see those and just look through what I've got. And there you go. So, garter stitch is probably the first stitch pattern that most people learning to knit learn. It only requires that you know one stitch, which is the knit stitch, and it's very easy. You just knit every row. So you'll need yarn and needles, and then for this you're going to cast on whatever amount you need. I've got 20 stitches here. And then you just knit, 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 knit. So other things to know about this. This is great for if you're swatching other stitch patterns. As you can see, it's relatively flat. It's not curling, it's not bubbling. There's a texture to it, but that's normal. And so when you need something to lie flat, whether it's the edge of a collar or the edge of a hem or the edge of a sleeve around the cuff, garter stitch can be your friend because it naturally lays flat. Whereas stockinette and reverse stockinette do not. And whenever I do swatches, I will usually put a garter stitch border around it because it's just easier to measure the center of your swatch if the borders are laying down. So I recommend learning this even if it's just for that reason. And if you want some mindless knitting, this is good. So there you go. I will be knitting Continental and Combination My Way, so I'll also link to those below so you can see what those are. And as it is, I'm just going to knit. I will do 4 rows so you can see what it looks like. I've got 6 done already, so which means I'll end on an even row. And this is the right side of the work, and you can tell this is the right side because the tail is on the right side of the, it's on the right hand side of the work. So to do garter stitch, you just knit and knit and knit, and that's it. You're doing garter stitch. Look at that. Initially, when you do your first row, it won't look like much of anything. And then you'll do your second row, and it'll start to take form. And funny thing is, I actually can't stand this stitch. I don't like it. Just because, I'm not really sure why I don't like it, but it's not aesthetically appealing to me. So I don't often do garter stitch. I've done it a few times, and I did it probably a lot more when I was beginning to knit than I do now. I do still use it for swatching, but seed and moss stitch also work just as well for that. So now we're on, this is the wrong side of the work. So you can see, and as you can see, it looks exactly the same. So that's another thing. If you want some reversible fabric, garter stitch is the way to go. There are other designs that are reversible. Alright, so we've got another 2 rows done, as you can see. It's got a nice squishy, it's got a squishy texture to it. We're on our third row. And because this is only knit, it's really easy for me to move to speed because I don't have to move my hands in any extra ways. Alright, so we're going to slow it down for this last row. You can see a little more clearly what we're doing. So you insert, stitch in the needle, and I'm working in the front. You can work in the back as well. Turning over, drawing up the loop. Make sure we get the stitch only. And a little faster. Keep splitting the yarn. And there you go. We've got 10 rows of garter stitch right here. Very squishy, very even, lays flat. And the reason this cast on is a little slightly smaller is in part because the cast on I use is a little tight. The long tail cast on is not the stretchiest of cast ons. So if I were to finish this and block it, I could get it all nice and relatively even. But there you go. That's your garter stitch. So I'd love to hear from you. Do you garter stitch? Do you like garter stitch? Do you have a stitch pattern that you prefer? You can drop a comment below. And don't forget to check out the description box. I've got a link to my entire knitting playlist on YouTube, the Exploring Stitch Patterns series that I'm doing, as well as combination knitting, continental knitting, and all that jazz. So, and I'll also link to the slip knot and the long tail cast on, and some other things. Yeah, I'll link to a bunch of things. Yeah. So there you go. Hope you enjoy, and happy knitting.